Okay, we're continuing learning in the book which is called Torah Or, which is a book of Hasidic teachings by the first Rebbe of Chabad, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. And it basically comes to explain what you should be thinking about God and how to bring these thoughts into to your heart. What you should be believing that God is, how you should understand these beliefs, and how you can take it to your heart. That's Chachma, Bina, and Das. Chabad. Chachma means belief, faith, in something that's totally above understanding, faith. Bina means trying to understand this as much as possible. That's Bina, Chachma, Bina. And that means to try to take it to your heart, to realize that it's really true, that God really is creating us and enlivening us and directing the whole world constantly. He's really the king of the world. He's creating the whole world all the time. He's providing for everyone. He answers our prayers. He alone. To pray to anything else is a big mistake. And on the other hand, not to have love and fear of God, it means to not to how do you say, express our potential. Potential of man is to love the creator of the universe, to use his emotions properly. Excuse me. Excuse me. So that's what all the writings of Hasidut are. They have the proper concept of God, and then to have the proper understanding of that concept as much as possible, and then to take this to heart, to make it really real, that it should change our emotions and our attitude and our thoughts, our speech and action, etc. So here we go. So this week we're learning in the Torah about the building of the tabernacle. The tabernacle was the prototype of the Holy Temple. And the main point of this tabernacle was twofold. One, that God revealed himself to us like he did in Mount Sinai. That was in the Holy of Holies. And two, that we can serve God. That's the rest of the Holy Temple. So God gives us revelation of himself like it was in Mount Sinai, but then we have to reciprocate. And then when we do reciprocate and we utilize this awareness of God that God gives us, this gratitude to God, then we have love of God and fear of God, and we want to do the commandments. And when we do that, then God reacts. God reacts to us. And God gives us a bigger blessing. When God gives us a bigger blessing, then we have more inspiration. The more inspiration we have, the more genuine we can be in doing the commandments, and we give more to the Creator. And then God reacts to that. And so it is this dynamic interaction between us and God. And the Rebbe says that this is demonstrated and what is it, personified again? I don't know, it's personified. What is it? It's manifested. In the two statues, the faces of angels that were pounded out from the cover on the ark. Right? In the Holy of Holies was this ark. It was this box. On the outside, it was gold. And inside of this box were the tablets that the Jews received on Mount Sinai. And with this tablet, with these tablets was the revelation on Mount Sinai. Namely, God revealed himself to us. God is always the beginner, right? He creates us also. That's no better beginning than that. So God creates us, and God gives us this awareness and this. And when we have it, then God wants us to reciprocate, to react. And when we react to God, then God reacts to us. And when God reacts to us, then he expects that we should react to him and agree with it, just like we just finished explaining. So that's these two faces of these cherubs that are on the ark facing one another. Right? Let's see, maybe we got a picture over here. We have a picture. Huh? Is it worthwhile to look for the picture? Maybe. Let's see. Oh. Nah, not worthwhile. Okay. Anyway, you remember from yesterday's Torah class, Chumash class. So one of these faces of the angels is God's representative of God's revelation, God's inspiration, God's presence coming to us. Something like it was on Mount Sinai, because that's why this whole thing was in the Holy of Holies, because the Holy of Holies was a simulation was of Mount Sinai. Exactly what happened to Mount Sinai. That's why the tablets were there. Was God coming to us, and the other one is us reacting back to God. That's the two angels, two faces of these angels, whatever they were, facing one the other. And that's serving. We serve God. God loves us. We serve him. God loves us, etc. Back and forth. And that's called peace. Peace means uniting of two opposites. That was in the time when there was the Holy Temple. That was in the time when there was the Holy Temple. Avobat Mishachar Beit HaMikdash, when the temple was destroyed, Nignas Keruvim, then the ark with the cover on it, and these two statues of the Keruvim, of these two angels that were pounded out. We'll learn about this today, by the way, in the Chumash class. Come to class, we'll see. And these Keruvim are gone. Nignas or Keruvim, it says they're gone. Where are they gone? It says that there was a king before the destruction of the second temple, of the first temple. Before the destruction of the first temple, there was a king who knew that the temple was going to be destroyed. And when King Solomon built the temple, he also had this sort of emergency chamber that was put down in winding pathways or chamber or is it hallways or whatever. Anyway, there's this chamber way down under the earth, and there is exactly corresponding to where the temple was, and there is where the tablets are buried. So they're there right now. They were there in the second temple, and they're there right now. So they were hidden. Okay, they're not supposed to be hidden, but they were hidden. So it says now that they're hidden, they don't have the same effect as they did when they were revealed. So what are we going to do now? It means that it's lost all this reaction and inner reaction. At least it's not there in a revealed way. It says that's exactly what King Solomon was hinting at when he said in his one of his masterpieces, right? He wrote the book of Proverbs and the book of Ecclesiastes, and he also wrote a very short book which is called Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. And in the Song of Songs, that's what it says, may it only be that you should be like a brother to me. It says that's what King Solomon was referring to. That's the request of King Solomon was just voicing the request of the Jewish people in the time of the exile, because he also foresaw, or he felt, or he was somehow or other inspired, he wrote about this terrible time that we're in now, when the temples were destroyed. King Solomon was writing his book, a love song between God and the Jewish people and God, the Jewish people when the temple was there, the Jewish people on Mount Sinai, the Jewish people in exile. We're searching for God, and then we give up, and then God starts searching for us. In any case, now we're talking about, this is the one aspect of this longing, which is the Jewish people longing for God and saying, Mi tencha ka'achli, it should only be me. It only be that you will be again a brother to me. Like it was in the time of the Holy Temple. They were like brothers. What does it mean, brothers? Brothers mean that it's a mutual relationship. They're on the same level. So to speak, God is on our level. He reacts to us. We react to God. God reacts to us. We're on the same level. That's what God put himself into the world. That's the Holy Temple. And we want this to be on a permanent basis. That God should respond to our love, and that we should feel this response, and then we respond even more. That's what it means, like brothers. We're on the same level. But also, it says that when the Jewish people were doing what they were supposed to, it says that they were facing these statues. They were facing one another. Interesting thing, it says that when they came into the Holy Temple to destroy the temple, it says that the cherubs, that the faces, they were facing one another. It was a sign of love. When the temple was destroyed, it says these angels were facing one another, showing that God loves the Jewish people. Now, why was the temple being destroyed? It says because God took it out on the temple and not on the Jewish people. The temple was destroyed, but the Jewish people will never be destroyed. They were punished very severely. There was maybe a greater percentage of Jews were killed in the destruction of the first temple, and then again in the second temple, than there were in the Holocaust. Not to minimize the terror and the tragedy of the Holocaust, but the Holocaust, a lot of the Jews weren't affected by the Holocaust. The Jews that lived in America or whatever, they weren't affected by the Holocaust. Even the Jews that ran away to Russia, that escaped from the onslaught of the Nazis, they weren't affected so much by the Holocaust, especially the ones in America and then South America, whatever. They for sure weren't affected. In the destruction of the temple, all the Jews were affected, and were affected even to now, to this day, 2,000 years later. The temple was destroyed. So it says, but nevertheless, it says that the statues were facing one another because God, true, he punishes us, but his love never goes away. But nevertheless, it's still, the love is not revealed. And that's what we're requesting. God, may it only be that you be like a brother to me. That you react to what we do and we see your reaction. Hainu al yedei ezek Torah. Now we don't have the Holy Temple. We don't have the sacrifices. A lot of the commandments that we had, we don't have, but we do have the Torah. The Torah is the same Torah. The Torah is the exact same Torah as it was at Mount Sinai. The Jewish people have been reading publicly from the Torah since it was given in Mount Sinai, 3,330. This year, I guess, 34 years. And non-stop, the Jews have been reading in public. You make one mistake in the reading of the Torah, in public, everybody jumps on you. Never stopped. Even when the Jews were driven into exile, they took the Sefer Torahs with them. Never was a time when they weren't reading the Torah. So that we have the same Torah as we do now. Kamaim Razal, like it says, the rabbi, Mishachar Beit HaMikdash, since the Holy Temple was destroyed, Ein Lo L'Kodesh Baruch Hu, God does not have in this world a dwelling, Ella, except Dalet Amos Shel Halacha. What's called the 4 Amos of Halacha, the area surrounding a person who learns Torah. The area surrounding a person who learns Torah. Let's say 6 feet on each side, something like that. What does that mean? That's what it says afterwards. Who will give you, like a brother to me, nursing from the breasts of my mother? And there was 2 brothers, they both nursed from the breasts of the same mother, right? If they're maternal brothers. And that's what God is saying. Now we are, how can we all be brothers with God now? How can we and God be on the same level? That's from the Torah, namely by nursing from the breasts of your mother. What's that? That's the Oral Torah. That's the Oral Torah. When God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai, I mean, open up a book of the Torah, the whole thing is not understandable at all. Even if you read a translation, that translation came because there was an interpretation of the Torah. Without the interpretation of the Torah, you don't even know how to read Hebrew. The words don't make any sense. You don't know what's an aleph and what's a base and what's a gimel. This was all handed down. And there has to be an oral Torah. There has to be an explanation of the Torah. God purposely gave it that way. When Moses was on Mount Sinai for 40 days, so God gave him the Torah, and he gave him a lot of the explanation of the Torah, and then he gave him principles by which later rabbis would learn more laws from the Torah, what God was hinting at in the Torah. That's what the whole Talmud is about. Great rabbis, it says most of them had the power to raise the dead. And they discussed what does God want, exactly what does God want the Jewish people to do. That's the laws of the Torah. That's when God gave the Torah, he gave laws. When we learn the Talmud, when we learn these different arguments, the different arguments which are in the Talmud are not personal arguments by very intelligent people. These are all the opinions of God. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. All of them are the words of the living God. That's what the Talmud is. The Talmud brought godliness even into arguments, even into human intelligence. That's we just finished last week learning mishpatim. Right? Mishpatim means logical laws which are. But what about the details? How much are you supposed to pay? Right? If I steal somebody's car, right? I have to, and they catch me with the car. I give the car back. You have to pay double. That's a law in the Torah. You have to give it back for sure. Why pay double? Because that's what God wants. How do you know that? It says in the Torah. How do you know it can explain with the Torah? That's what the rabbis are there to explain. That's the whole Talmud. That the Talmud is the revelation of the wisdom and the will of God, really. Hari, if so, in a person that he understands a law, so he grabs and understands the wisdom of God, eternal wisdom of God right now is written in my mind, in my brain, in my thoughts. Asher huwa yodea b'hu ada, that God is the knower and God is the knowledge, etc. Usually when a person knows something, so there's me, I'm the person who knows, and then there's the object of my knowledge, right? Let's say this book that I'm reading, the Talmud, and then there's the aspect of awareness, of knowledge. It could be that I'm there and the book is there, but let's say I'm concentrating on something else, thinking about something else. So I can't, so there's three things involved. When I know something, there's me, there's the object of my knowledge, and then there's the knowledge that joins the two of them together, the awareness. Well, by God, it doesn't work that way. By God, the world is not separate from God. So God, it's not that God is the knower, and then there's a world that God knows, and then there's the knowledge in between that connects them. No, it says that God is the knower, the knowledge, huwa yodea, God is the knower, he is the knowledge, etc. It's all one. When you learn the Torah, that's where this unity is manifested. You get ideas in your mind that are actually God's ideas. These are not the ideas of Rabbi Akiva or of Hillel and Shammai. These are the ideas of God creating, etc. Just the fact is, so is everybody. Everyone in the world is a miraculous creation of God. But that's comes from God's external speech. The God's internal speech, or for God's thought, that's the Torah. That's where everything is one. Therefore, when a Jew learns Torah, that's what these boys are doing when they sit and they learn Talmud all the day. A Jew is supposed to learn Talmud all the day. They're supposed to learn Talmud as much as possible, every moment of the day if he can. Therefore, it's called by means of this, Achim. The Jewish people and God are called brothers. Shemakablim Shneim, that both of them receive from the same source. Shehu, which is Chachman bin Elah, God's upper wisdom and God's upper understanding. So God, as he comes into this world and he has emotions, he loves us, etc., that's that aspect of God that he's in the world. Well, so to speak, that aspect of God that's in the world receives from the Torah. Just like, now this is Kabbalistic ideas, terms, we said that God creates man in his image, right? So God has an image. That's what it says, that God creates man in his image. So it must be God has an image. But we know God does not have an image. God is infinite. So why does it say in the Torah that we're created in God's image? So it says, as God relates to the world, God, so to speak, has an image. And this image of God is the way that God acts and reacts to the world. That's mainly God's 7 emotions. That's why the world was created in 7 days. God could have created the world in 1 instant. Exactly. The time is a creation. So it wouldn't have to take any time whatsoever to create God. For God to create the world, I'm sorry. For God to create the world. Time is the creation. And what do you mean God took 7 days to create the world? God created the 7 days themselves. The time created. Why did he take 7? Because 7 is the the spiritual form of God's emotions. It's called zeranpin, small faces. That's God's 7 emotions. God's 7 emotions. This is also the 7 different types of the Jewish people. That's symbolized by the menorah. By the 7 sticks of the menorah what's it called, the candelabra, the candles in the Holy Temple. 7 lamps or whatever. They were on these stems. So it says they receive also from God's wisdom, av v'aim. That's what's called God's intellect, chachma bin adas. It says that's what the time of the Jewish people now we're in exile. We don't have the Holy Temple, but we do have the Torah. And because we do have the Torah, when we learn the Torah, even the most simple ideas in the Torah, we're connected. We have in our mind the wisdom, the thoughts, the will of God. And so to speak, we and God, as God is in the world with the Jewish people, become on the same basis. We both receive from this Chachma and Bina. Where is this? That's what it means, nursing, what King Solomon hinted at, that we should be brothers nursing from the breasts of our mother. That namely, both we and God are on the same level because we put God, so to speak, into our mind when we learn the Torah. And this is so it is, I'm sorry, when you learn the Torah, you grasp what's called God's wisdom and God's understanding. That's why the Torah is called chalav. That's why the Torah is called milk. Like it says, lahu scharu, so yayin v'chalav. It says wine and milk. Kamoshal derav mashal, just like in a way of example, havlad, a child, excuse me, just like in a way of example, a child, excuse me 1 second. Okay, I just want to see where the source is. 1 minute, please. I'm sorry, I should have looked this up before, but I didn't. Here we go. Here we go. Excuse me 1 moment. Excuse me. Here it is. There it is. Here it is. 1 minute. It's a pasuk in Isaiah. It's a sentence in Isaiah, chapter Nun Hey. Want to look it up? The Torah is called God's milk. It's called milk. Yain b'chalav. That's why the Torah is called milk. Like it says, lachu shivru yain b'chalav. Kamo, the Torah is called wine and milk, just like a child. Billy does so when he's born. He is ultimately very small. What does he eat? He can't eat bread. What does he eat? By means of Yanika Sochalav, by means of him drinking the milk of his mother, Misgadli Nevorov, his limbs grow, he grows, his body grows. Bagam the Shalmo Bomochin, the Yanika, and also his mind grows. Lochi, and therefore Matchila Daber, therefore he can begin to speak and to go, walk. The milk. Kacha Neshamos, also the souls. Kod and Bola Ulamazeh, before the souls are born, before the soul is put into the body, first of all, it was in the level of being like a fetus. It was a state of being pregnant. In what's called this level of the lower bina, anyway, so a spiritual level. That's what it says. Chai Hashem asher amarati lefanav. God is alive, that I stood before him. The Yuridas and Neshama, and the descent of the soul coming into the world, right? Coming into the world. I think this is Elijah the prophet said this, that I stood in front of him, that God, the Yuridas and Neshama, the soul coming into the world, Misham, into Bria Yitzir Nasiya. The soul starts off in this world of what's called Atzilus, the highest godly the dimension, and then it comes down into the world. When it's in this godly dimension, it's sort of like a fetus in the womb of its mother, totally united. When it comes down into the physical world to be put into a body, that's called giving birth, right? The soul is giving birth. Not only the body is giving birth, but also the soul is born, so to speak. It comes into the world. That's what it means. Ayom anili yaladaticha. That's what it means. Today I gave birth to you. What does it mean? That the Torah is called milk. And as soon as the child is born, he drinks milk, and this milk nourishes and makes grow all of the limbs of his soul. The Ramach Evorim, the 248 limbs of the soul, which that corresponds to the 248 limbs of the body that to this very day, I don't know exactly what they are. It includes the heart and the brain and this and the lungs. I've never seen a list of what these 248 limbs of the, there's 248 limbs in another place in Oral, but that's talking about the bones. How many bones? In any case, there are 248 limbs of the body, which exactly correspond to the 248 commandments of God, which that corresponds to the 248 aspects of God's will, which are put into these commandments. But it all depends on the Jewish people doing the commandments. So when the child is born, and this can be a child being born, this is referring to the Jewish people now in the time of exile. The Jewish people now in the time of exile, we are like a newborn baby, totally helpless. And what makes us grow now is we can't eat bread, we can't eat this milk. What's milk? Milk is learning the Torah. Learning the Torah. When that does, it nourishes our soul. And this is the 248 limbs of the soul. Okay, here's one way of figuring out this 248. This is the 10 sfirot, the 9 sfirot, the 9 sfirot of godliness. Sometimes they say you leave out Malchut, sometimes you leave out the top one. 9 times 9, each one contains 9. 9 times 9 is 81. Times 3. It says Rosh, Toch, and Sof. Here he doesn't go into the whole thing. 81 times 3 is 243. Where do you get 248? It says that's what's called the 5. What is it? What is it? What the 5? The 5 kindnesses of God. Hey, chasadim. Okay, you have to understand Kabbalah in order to understand this, and I don't understand Kabbalah, but then nevertheless, that's what it says. It says these are the 9 sfirot times the 9 sfirot, which is 81. It was beginning, middle, and end. In other words, each one is times 3, that 120, 283, 204, so 243, and then there's 5 aspects of God's kindness. And anyways, that's what it comes out to. And therefore, Omer Razal, the rabbi say, happy is a person that after he dies, he goes to heaven, and his learning Torah is still with him. By means of this, Nasa and Neshama, the soul becomes Gidul Yoter. The soul becomes bigger, more above Harbeh Mikamosha Yasatchila than it was in the beginning before it came into the world. Before it came into the world, it didn't have as much Torah. And now when it learns the Torah, so it becomes bigger. There's other things also that make the Torah bigger, but here the Rebbe is stressing learning the Torah. That's called giving birth. That by means of it, nursing from the breasts of his mother, and we said that the breasts of his mother, that's what's called the oral Torah, the interpretation of the Torah, the Talmud. As the ideas that come out, that's like the milk. And that's what it means that he comes out, Talmud biyado, even if you have one sentence, if this makes the soul grow up. Okay, says the Rebbe, one second. After all, the Torah is just a book. let's understand, how is it possible that that God becomes like a brother, and he also nurses from learning the Torah of the Jewish people down here? What's going on? We learn the Torah. The Torah is like milk, and the soul gets nourishment. But we're saying that's not the point. The point we're saying here is that God gets nourishment. God gets nourishment. We become like brothers. We're both nursing from the same breasts, the same milk. God gets nourishment from our learning Torah. Does that make any sense? God is infinite. God really, how can it possibly be that God receives? So, okay, that's what this whole thing was based on, is that God reacts and God receives from what we do. This is not necessarily so much of a popular idea. A lot of very religious Jews do not accept this. That's one of the novelties that Hasidut, Chabad, wanted to stress in the world. Like I say, it's not a new idea. It's not an invention, right? The Song of Songs is filled with it. The Zohar is filled with this idea of God reacting to us, like a husband and a wife, like a mother and a son. And here we're saying like two brothers. And then when we learn the Torah, God also gets nourished, so to speak. We nourish from the same milk. Okay, how can this possibly be? Inyan is like this. Roy Yisrael. God is called the shepherd of Israel. In Psalms, Roy Yisrael Hazinu. Because even it says, Achoti Rayoti. You want to know where that is? Yes, you probably do. Well, I do here. It's in the Psalms, right in the beginning of the Psalm 80. It says, Achoti Rayoti, my sister, my beloved. But Rayoti can also mean the same words are like a shepherd. Rayoti means that she provides for me. So this is also from King Solomon. King Solomon said, Boti Lagani Achote Rayoti, my sister, my beloved. But it also means my sister, my provider. Okay, now we can say that this is we're talking to God, or God is speaking to us. In the book of Song of Songs, sometimes he's saying what we're saying to God, and sometimes what God's saying to us. Look over it. It changes tense, and it changes past, present, future, masculine, feminine, plural, singular, right? It changes constantly, even in the same sentence. So here, this is God speaking to the Jewish people that we are his sister and we provide for God. Yisrael mefarnesim lavim mishabashamayim. The Jewish people, they provide for their Father in heaven. Now the basis of Judaism is that God is infinite and that God has no form. But on the other hand, here we're saying that that's true, but it also means that God is infinite and he has no form. It means he's not limited to being above the world. He's not limited. That's the Torah, explaining exactly how God interacts with the world. Right? You could say, well, if God can be in the world, maybe I can worship a person, maybe I can worship a tree. Yeah, you're right, maybe you can, but the Torah says you can't. The Torah says you're not supposed to. That's what God decided. When we learn the Torah, it says we actually we nourish God. We nourish God. How can it possibly be? What happens when a person is nourished? He wakes up, a person that's very sick, a person that's very hungry, right? If it gets out of hand, he's hungry, he can't even move. His muscles are gone, he just fades away. By feeding a person, the person becomes stronger. He becomes more alive. That's what the Rebbe said, for instance, the fast of Esther. It can't be that the Jewish people fasted before they went into battle. Because a soldier has to be nourished, he has to eat. What did Napoleon say? That an army runs on its stomach. He was an evil person, but he was right. When a person eats, so he's stronger. The same thing is with God. What does it mean when a person is stronger? He can reveal himself more. God is more revealed when he eats. What does he eat? The Jewish people, when they learn Torah, that provides nourishment for God. Just like bread. The bread links the soul with the body, right? A person is dying, you give him a piece of bread, and he comes back to life. And also, when we provide for God, we draw down Giloi Or Ein Sof, the revelation of the infinite, the infinite light of God. We draw it down into the 10 sfirot of Atzilut. We draw it down into what's called the 10 aspects of the highest dimension, which is called Atzilut, which that's called Guvin, that's called, so to speak, called God's body. When we say that God creates us in his image, we mean the God's image, how it is in this world of Atzilut, how God, so to speak, comes down to us. But God has to come down. Even Chachmei Eloah, even the highest aspect of this world of Atzilut, is incomparable to God's Ein Sof, to God's infiniteness. How do we bring, so to speak, God? How do we strengthen God that he can be active and come into the world by means of learning Torah? Now, this doesn't really make any sense, but that's how God set the world up. That's how he set the world up. God did personally take the Jews out of Egypt. He did personally give them his Torah. Everyone, the Jews did personally see God on Mount Sinai. It says face to face. And they heard God. So God does come down into the world. But that's all God acting. What about God reacting? So it says, since God gave the Torah, so God reacts to what we do. God was reacting beforehand also. That's why he brought the flood, right? Because everybody was doing sin, so he brought the flood. Why he chose Noah? Says Noah found favor in God's eyes, so God reacted. God made a covenant with Abraham, right? God reacted to what Abraham did. That's what it says. That's what it says. Here is our God. We waited for him. It's a book in Isaiah. Isaiah says one day we're going to say, this is our God. We have waited for him. The revelation, the same revelation as it was on Mount Sinai. That we can draw down, we can actually reveal God from kivinulo. We hoped for him. The word kav also means like a pipeline. We drew God down in the way of a pipeline, a revelation, like a street coming from one place to another. Hainu, he's labshus or that we can actually make God's infinite light be clothed in the 10 sfirot of Atzilut, which they are in the form of man, right, left, and middle. The 3 pillars, the 3, highways. Chesed is on the right, that's the right arm of God, and it's at the left arm of God is his severity. And corresponding to them, that's Torah, Avodah, Mitzvah, Sedim. That's why we have this 9 times 9, and we multiplied it by 3 in order to get 243, limbs of God. And then there's the 5 aspects of kindness that makes 248. Okay, let's see in the future. Yitkaleh will be revealed. Kol Am Shachor, everything that we've been learning Torah for all these 2,000 years will be revealed. Therefore, it says, Bayom Ahu, on that day we will see the oneness of God, the revelation of the essence of God, like it was on Mount Sinai, even more, and we will see and feel. But what it says, Yonek Shareimi, that we nurse from the breasts of my mother. This is what Torah Shabal Peh. This, we're specifically talking about learning the Talmud. Because the written Torah, this is called Moser Avicha. This is called the chastisement, the severities of your father. And that's the written Torah. And the scroll, the 5 books of Moses. And the oral Torah that explains this is called the Torah of your mother. Because the written Torah, everything is very, very terse, very, very tight. Like a father, he gives the seed, one little seed. The main growing of the child is in the mother. The same thing, God gave the Torah, that's like the seed. Where is the will of God and the understanding of what God wants? That's in the mother. What's the mother? That's the Talmud, the revelation of the laws of the Torah. This is in the oral Torah. the Talmud. When we learn the Oral Torah, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the laws, the Midrash, when we learn all this, this is and the Araisa, this is the Torah. Oraisa, what's called the Oraisa, that comes from the written Torah, that comes from God's Chachma. But the oral Torah, the explanation of the Torah by the rabbis, that's the Talmud. This comes from what's called Bina, which is called mother. Says the Rebbe, there's another thing over here. According to Kabbalah, the main revelation of pleasure comes from proper understanding. And understanding is in Bina. Kisha Mevin Adavar, when you understand something clearly, like it says in the Zohar, Eved Alevi Hu. By means of this, it's like a person, let's say his father, that he's been longing for his father and his mother, right, since the Holocaust. He's been separated from them for 30 years. He gives up on them. One day somebody brings this old couple into his house. He says, who is this? Do you recognize him? I don't recognize him. This is your mother and father. What? You're my mother and father. What's your name? So my name is Reuven. What's your last name? What's your father's name? Oh, he understands. This is my mother and father. Oh, he's so happy. So, but before he understood, he wasn't happy. Why? There they were. There was his mother and father that he's been longing for 30 years, right? And he's been searching and didn't find them. And there they are right in front of him. But when he understands, that's when he gets the big pleasure. Similarly, the Torah, that's Torah Shabbat, the written Torah, that's like his mother, his parents, but he doesn't understand them. That's God bringing himself into the world, but he doesn't understand it. By means of understanding, then Nimshach Mimenu is drawn down from God pleasure. This pleasure right now is what's called in heaven, Gan Eden. That the souls get pleasure, it says, from the ray of godliness. And God comes together with the tzaddikim in Gan Eden. All of this is by means of the Torah. After a person dies, you get a revelation of a little bit of this. But the fact of the matter is, the essence of it says is here right now. But that's the thing we don't understand. That's what Chassidut is trying to make us come to be aware of. Like it says, anyone who learns laws every day is promised that he will be Olam Haba. We'll go to Olam Haba, the world to come. Laws, it's explained. So what are we saying? Now that there is no holy temple, we want to be again like brothers with God. How do we do it? By learning the Talmud and understanding the ideas of the Talmud. That is a way we can be brothers with God. If a person that doesn't learn Torah, so God is still his father, God is still his mother, God is still his friend, God is still the king. But to be brothers with God, to be in the same how do you say, same degree, level as God is. That God is like our brother with us, and we feel this camaraderie. How is it? What's the word for it? Camaraderie. Oh, camaraderie between us and God, like two brothers. We are. That's by learning the Torah, learning the written Torah, by learning the oral Torah, by learning the Talmud and understanding it. Okay, we have to understand also that when we learn the Talmud, it's very possible to learn the Talmud and to forget about God. You can learn the whole Torah and forget about who gave the Torah. It's possible. A person has to sit and think. What are you going to think about? That's the ideas of Chassidut. That's why it's here to tell us that really the essence of God is in these ideas that we learn when we learn the Torah. But that's not enough. There's going to be even more, and that is doing the commandments and working in the physical world, that everything we do, see, hear, say, think, even the most mundane things, that we connect that to God. That's also a way to reveal God b'chutz, and that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. So what are we saying? The Holy Temple was wonderful. My pleasure, Davi. The Holy Temple, when it was here, you too. We and God were like brothers. Now the temple is destroyed. How do we do it? By learning the Torah. And now we're going to learn the Devar Malchut of this week. Don't go away. Here we go.